You ever wish life came with a user manual? A clear set of instructions for how to navigate this whole complex thing of being human? Well, today, we're diving into something pretty close, a modern philosophical blueprint that lays out 18 distinct principles for living a more deliberate and hopefully more meaningful life.
I mean, this is the big question, right? If you had to sit down and write the absolute core rules for your own life, what would they even be? It's a question that philosophers have wrestled with for centuries, and today we're going to explore one writer's very direct, very pointed set of answers.
So our guide for this little journey is a short but incredibly potent text from a writer named Shui Feng. And listen, these aren't some vague, feel-good suggestions. They are 18 clear and, yeah, sometimes pretty challenging principles that really form a complete philosophy for living. We're going to break them down into 3 key areas.
First up, we've got to start with the self, right? Before you can even think about dealing with the outside world, you have to get your own internal foundation sorted out. You need to understand your personal operating system.
The very first principle here is a huge reorientation of purpose. It basically argues that the main channel of your life, the absolute non-negotiable goal, is your own fulfillment. We're talking happiness, joy, and freedom. Everything else, your job, social obligations, you name it, they're just side roads. It's a pretty radical call to put your own well-being at the absolute center of your universe.
And this philosophy frames that whole pursuit in a really fascinating way. It's not just about this one single lifetime. The text asks us to see our time here on Earth as just one small leg of a much, much larger, endless journey. This kind of gives our finite lives both a sense of urgency, but also this grand, almost cosmic perspective.
And then, bam, we get this really stark warning. This principle argues that the moment you make money your primary metric for what has value and meaning, you've basically disconnected from what it means to be truly human.
And you can really see that conflict laid out here. On one side, you've got that main channel of life, the things that actually matter, like happiness and freedom. And on the other, the values of the material world. This philosophy is crystal clear. You have to choose which of these columns you're actually living in. So, how do you stay on that main channel? Well, the text offers a kind of personal code. First, be honest, not just for other people, but because it's the best strategy for your own life. Second, avoid the easy path, the path of pure comfort, because that just leads to decay. And finally, you have to understand that the universe, it keeps a perfect balance sheet. What you give is always what you get back.
And this kind of brings us to a moment of reflection for this first part. Just take a second and look at your own life. Is the path you're on right now, your main channel, is it truly aligned with what you value most? Or have you maybe drifted onto one of those side roads?
Okay, let's move on. Let's see how this all builds in our second section. So once you've established that inner compass, how do you actually interact with the world around you, with other people, and with the big structures of society?
The core idea in this whole section is radical self-reliance. The philosophy pretty much argues that your standing in the world isn't really determined by who you know, but by what you can do. Your skills, your abilities, your intrinsic value, that's the only currency that actually matters in the end.
And the text is super direct about this. It suggests that all that time you might spend on superficial networking, it's a waste. Instead, you should invest that energy in becoming more capable. See, respect isn't something you can just ask for or try to manipulate. It's an automatic byproduct of being valuable.
Okay, now the philosophy turns its attention to larger power structures, and it has let's say, a deeply cynical view. It frames the state not as some neutral thing, but as a tool. If you're powerful, the state is your paradise. It serves your interests. But if you're powerless, it's a prison that contains you.
And flowing right from that idea is this principle about personal courage. The author argues that the absolute foundation of your personal freedom is your ability to defy authority when you have to. Without that willingness to say no, a life of servitude is pretty much guaranteed.
So, if you are one of the powerless in this system, what's the strategy? The text offers some really pragmatic advice. Don't waste your energy in arguments you know you can't win. Instead, focus on your work, build your own value, and operate quietly and effectively within your own sphere. And finally, in this section on the social world, we get this incredibly stark definition of marriage. It's framed as a conscious choice to give up half of your personal autonomy. It's a very pragmatic, not at all romantic view that basically says, from that point forward, your life is inherently a shared compromise. All right, on to our final section. We've looked inward at the self, and we've looked outward at society. This last set of principles, it looks upward
toward a connection with the universe and a higher state of being.
Now, this is a fascinating principle about the power of clear intention. Think of it like this. The universe, or even just other people, they can't help you if you don't actually know what you're asking for. Being vague leads to nothing. You have to formulate and express what you want with absolute clarity to have any hope of getting help.
The spiritual foundation of this whole philosophy is built on these three pillars of reverence. It calls for a deep respect for a higher power, for the absolute miracle of life in all its forms, and for the natural world that sustains us all. Following the natural way is key.
And here it is, the ultimate goal, the absolute pinnacle of this entire philosophy. The highest state of being is what's called the sage, a person who has completely transcended their own selfishness and ego. And the text suggests that finding and aligning yourself with a person like that, well, that's the most direct path to enlightenment, or what it calls heaven.
So after that whirlwind tour through 18 different principles, what do we really take away from this blueprint for being?
Well, we've seen a pretty clear, logical progression, haven't we? It starts with mastering yourself. Then, it teaches you how to engage with the world from that position of strength. And finally, it points you toward a transcendent purpose, something beyond just the everyday grind. You know, the real power of this blueprint isn't just in any single rule. It's in how they all interlock to create a complete system for living. It's a challenging, it's an uncompromising, and it's a deeply thoughtful guide to just being.
And that leaves us with one final question for you. Think back on everything we've just covered. Which of these principles really resonates with you the most? The one you'd want to live by? And maybe even more importantly, which one do you fundamentally disagree with? The answer to both of those questions, it reveals a whole lot about your own blueprint for being.